It's 2023, and the story takes place in a small, quiet American town. The town has a peaceful, almost perfect vibe with its clean streets, cozy homes, and friendly neighbors. But underneath this calm exterior, things aren't as simple as they seem, and secrets are beginning to surface. Grace Miller is a housewife in her early 30s. She's been married to her high school sweetheart, James, for years. To everyone around her, Grace's life looks perfect. She has a lovely home and a caring husband. But Grace feels empty. Her marriage has lost its spark, and she often feels lonely and unimportant. She loves James, but something is missing, and she wishes for more excitement and connection in her life. James is Grace's husband, also in his 30s. He works long hours at a local factory and spends most of his time focused on providing for the family. He loves Grace, but he's often tired and distant, not noticing how she's feeling. He believes that working hard and being dependable is enough to show his love, but he doesn't realize that his emotional absence is pushing Grace further away. Khloe is Grace's younger sister, full of energy and life. She's in her late 20s and is married to Alex, a man who shares her outgoing personality. Khloe and Alex are very happy together, and they seem to have a perfect marriage. Grace admires Khloe's zest for life, but she secretly feels envious of her sister's excitement and happiness, wishing she could feel that way too. Alex is Khloe's husband. He's kind, charming, and attentive qualities that Grace notices more and more. He works as a contractor and is always around to spend time with Khloe. Grace starts to see how easy Alex makes everything seem. He listens to her, makes her laugh, and makes her feel understood in a way that James no longer does. Grace knows it's wrong to feel drawn to her sister's husband, but she can't help the way she feels. Grace sits alone in the quiet of her living room, looking out the window as the sunlight fades. She's lost in thought, a sense of emptiness weighing on her chest. Her mind drifts back to her marriage with James. At first, everything had been perfect high school sweethearts, deeply in love, building a life together. But now, everything has changed. James is always busy, either working late or distracted by his endless list of responsibilities. He doesn't notice her need for affection or emotional support. When he's home, he's tired, withdrawn, and often avoids deep conversations. Grace remembers the laughter they shared in their earlier years, the way they once could talk for hours about everything and nothing. But those days feel like a distant memory. The silence in their home has become deafening. Grace feels invisible, and she wonders if James even notices how distant they've become. She's tried talking to him, but his mind is always somewhere else. And when he does engage, it's always about the bills, his work, or things that don't connect them emotionally. It was during a family gathering that things first started to shift. Khloe had invited Grace and James to a barbecue at her house. As usual, Khloe's home was filled with the sounds of laughter, children running around, and the smells of grilled food. The family was in high spirits, but Grace couldn't shake the heavy feeling in her chest. She felt like a stranger in her own marriage, surrounded by people who seemed to have it all figured out. James was talking to some of the other men, and Khloe was busy catching up with friends. Grace found herself alone in the corner of the yard, staring out at the sunset. That's when Alex walked over, holding a cold drink in his hand. They exchanged small talk at first, chatting about trivial things, but soon the conversation turned to old memories. Grace found herself reminiscing about their childhood, when they used to run around the neighborhood together, carefree and full of life. Alex listened intently, and for the first time in a long while, Grace felt seen. There was a warmth in his gaze, a genuine interest in what she had to say. As they spoke, something shifted between them, an unspoken connection that neither could ignore. Their chemistry was undeniable. There was a spark, a tension in the air that both of them could feel but didn't quite know how to handle. When the conversation ended, Alex lingered a little longer, and Grace found herself wishing it hadn't. After that night, they exchanged a few more conversations here and there, nothing too out of the ordinary. But each time, Grace couldn't help but feel a growing pull towards him, a connection that seemed to fill the empty space she had been living in for so long. Over the next few weeks, the meetings between Grace and Alex became more frequent. They started finding excuses to be alone, grabbing coffee together, helping each other with errands, or simply going for walks. With each conversation, Grace felt the distance between her and James grow even wider. Alex was attentive in ways that James wasn't anymore. He listened to her, made her laugh, and understood the things she longed to say but couldn't find the words for. The emotional connection quickly deepened, and Grace found herself craving more. One afternoon, Alex invited Grace to his place under the guise of helping with some paperwork for Khloe. It was innocent enough, but once inside, the tension between them became palpable. They were alone, no distractions. They spoke for a while, but soon the conversation stopped and their eyes locked. Without thinking, Grace found herself in Alex's arms. The kiss they shared was electric, charged with everything they had been holding back. From that moment on, their encounters grew more intimate. At first, it was just stolen kisses, lingering touches, and quiet moments of passion. But soon, their physical connection couldn't be denied, and they began having secret meetings in private, away from the prying eyes of their families. Grace justified it to herself, convincing herself that she deserved this attention, this affection, this connection that she had longed for. She told herself that her marriage with James was already broken, that what she and Alex shared wasn't a betrayal, but a necessary escape from the emotional isolation she had been living in. Their affair became a regular part of Grace's life. She found herself looking forward to the next meeting, the next stolen moment. Every time she was with Alex, it felt like she was living in a world where she was wanted, cherished, and understood. For the first time in years, Grace felt alive. She started making excuses to be around Alex, using work, family events, and even the weather as reasons to meet. But as the affair continued, it became harder for Grace to hide the guilt that gnawed at her. She knew that what they were doing was wrong, but the pull of the connection, the passion, and the attention she was getting from Alex felt too powerful to resist. Meanwhile, James remained oblivious to the growing bond between his wife and his brother-in-law, too caught up in his own world to see what was happening right under his nose. As the weeks passed, the affair became a dangerous secret that neither Grace nor Alex wanted to end, but neither knew how it would ultimately unfold. It wasn't long before James began to notice the changes in Grace. At first, he thought it was just a phase. Maybe she was feeling a little more upbeat because of the good weather or a recent family gathering. But soon, he couldn't ignore it. Grace had become more lively, almost too cheerful at times, and she was often distracted. She would stare off into space during their dinners, lost in her own thoughts. And when he tried to talk to her, her responses were short, as though her mind was elsewhere. James tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe it was just stress from their busy lives, he told himself. But then, there were the little things, the extra hours she spent away from home, the sudden interest in her appearance, and the way she would smile to herself sometimes when she thought no one was looking. One evening, after work, James walked into the kitchen to find Grace humming as she prepared dinner. Normally, she was too tired after a day of household chores to do much more than cook quietly. But tonight, she was full of energy, and it unsettled him. He watched her for a moment, trying to piece together what had changed. She wasn't the same woman he married. There was a distance between them. and he couldn't figure out why. James began to ask her questions. Small ones at first. Did you have a good day? You seem in a good mood lately. Anything on your mind? But Grace always answered with a smile, brushing off his concerns. Still, something didn't sit right with him. He felt a nagging feeling in his gut, a sense that something was going on behind the scenes. It wasn't just her newfound energy. It was the way she was pulling away from him emotionally. James's suspicions were growing, and he wasn't sure where to go from there. Meanwhile, Khloe had been spending more time with Grace, trying to reconnect with her older sister. But one evening, things took a surprising turn. Khloe and Alex were relaxing at home when Alex's phone buzzed with a notification. He'd left his phone on the kitchen counter while he went to grab something from the other room, and Khloe, out of habit, glanced at the screen. What caught her eye wasn't the message itself, but the name that flashed across the screen, Grace Miller. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't unusual for Grace to text Alex. They often chatted about family matters. But Khloe had never seen Grace's name pop up like that, at such an odd hour. Curiosity got the better of her, and before she could stop herself, she unlocked Alex's phone to read the message. The text was innocuous enough on the surface. I'll see you later tonight. Can't wait. But there was something about the way it was worded, something that felt off. Khloe's gut told her that this wasn't just a simple family text. She felt a cold wave of suspicion wash over her as she reread the message. Grace, her own sister, was making plans to meet Alex at night. Khloe tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was nothing. Perhaps Grace was just reaching out for some family support. But deep down, her instincts told her there was more to the story. Alex was always busy with work, but it wasn't like him to be so vague. Something didn't feel right. Over the next few days, Khloe started paying closer attention to the way Alex behaved. He was leaving the house more often, disappearing for hours, always with some excuse about work. He had always been hardworking, but now his work commitments seemed to be more frequent and less transparent. Khloe began to connect the dots. Grace had been distant, and Alex's behavior was shifting. Something was wrong. Her mind raced, and she couldn't ignore the possibility that there was more going on between her husband and her sister than she could have ever imagined. Unable to ignore her growing suspicions, Khloe decided to confront Alex. That evening, when they were alone in their living room, she couldn't hold back any longer. She tried to stay calm, her voice steady, but the anger and betrayal burned behind her words. Alex, she began, I need to ask you something, and I want the truth. Are you and Grace seeing each other? Alex froze. For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights, and Khloe could see the panic flicker in his eyes. He opened his mouth to deny it, but the hesitation in his voice betrayed him. What are you talking about, Khloe? He asked, trying to deflect. But Khloe had already seen enough to know. The guilt in Alex's eyes was unmistakable. He sat down slowly, avoiding her gaze, his fingers fidgeting nervously. It's not what you think, he finally admitted, his voice low and strained. Grace and we've been seeing each other. I never meant for this to happen, but it did. The words hit Khloe like a punch to the stomach. Her hands trembled as the reality of the situation sank in. How long? She whispered, her voice breaking. Several weeks, Alex confessed, unable to look her in the eye. I didn't want to hurt you, Khloe. I never wanted this to happen. Khloe felt a wave of devastation wash over her. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a betrayal from both her sister and her husband. Her heart shattered as she struggled to process the reality of the affair. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could you? She asked, her voice barely audible. You're my husband, and she's my sister. Alex didn't have an answer, only silence, as he hung his head in shame. He knew he had crossed a line, but there was nothing he could do to undo the damage. Devastated, Khloe couldn't hold it in any longer. She grabbed her phone and texted Grace, her hands shaking with fury and heartbreak. "We need to talk. Now." When Grace finally replied, she seemed calm, almost too calm. Khloe called her immediately, her voice cracking as she demanded the truth. "Grace, is it true? Are you having an affair with Alex?" For a moment, Grace didn't answer. Khloe could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. When Grace finally spoke, her voice was filled with guilt. "Khloe, I didn't mean for it to happen this way. But yes, it's true." There was a long pause before Grace spoke again, her tone pleading. "Please understand, I never wanted to hurt you. I just felt so alone. Alex made me feel alive again, something I haven't felt in years." Khloe was speechless. She had suspected the affair, but hearing it from Grace's own lips felt like a betrayal she could never recover from. "How could you do this to me?" Khloe asked, her voice trembling with pain. Grace apologized again, but Khloe could hardly listen anymore. Her sister's confession had shattered their relationship in a way that could never be repaired. But Grace wasn't done yet. "Khloe, please, I'm sorry. Please, understand that I never meant for any of this to happen." Khloe's heart was broken, and she didn't know what to do next. The life she thought she knew had just been turned upside down. In the aftermath of the painful confrontation, Khloe felt lost and alone, consumed by a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. But it wasn't just Alex who had hurt her. It was Grace too. Her own sister, whom she had trusted more than anyone, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Khloe found herself pacing the house, her mind racing with the thoughts of what to do next. That's when she turned to James. Though they had never been particularly close, the shared betrayal they both felt created a bond between them that neither had anticipated. Khloe had always seen James as a distant figure, a man who was married to her sister and lived a life far removed from her own. But now, both of them were suffering from the same kind of heartache. Grace had hurt them both, in different ways. James had also felt a sense of isolation in his marriage. He'd been unaware of the affair, but looking back, he could see the cracks in their relationship. He'd been blind to the emotional distance that had crept between him and Grace. Now, standing alongside Khloe, he could see how much pain both of them were in. They began talking, the raw emotions spilling out. James admitted that he had known something was wrong with Grace, but had never expected this. Khloe poured out her heart about how betrayed she felt by her sister. Together, they found a shared understanding that had eluded them before. In their shared grief and shock, they found solace. And with that comfort came a shared resolve. They needed to make Grace and Alex face the consequences of their actions. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. They couldn't let their lives be torn apart without doing something about it. After their conversation, Khloe and James agreed to work together, a united front, in the face of unimaginable betrayal. They began plotting, carefully deciding how to confront Grace and Alex. Their plan would be methodical. They couldn't let their emotions cloud their judgment. They needed to make sure that the truth came out, and that Grace and Alex couldn't just sweep their actions under the rug. As the days went by, the anger inside James grew, festered by the constant reminders of Grace's betrayal. He would see her in passing, and it felt as though a veil of deceit hung between them. Every time he looked at her, he saw only the lies she'd woven, the years of marriage that had been tainted by her affair with Alex. His resentment simmered just below the surface, and the more he thought about it, the more furious he became. Khloe, too, was consumed by a deep sense of betrayal, but hers was more personal. Grace hadn't just broken the bond of sisterhood. She had taken something that Khloe had held dear for years. She had been blindsided, hurt, not just as a wife, but as a sister, someone who had always felt a sense of loyalty toward Grace. The emotional toll of the affair wore on her, and each time she thought about the connection Grace had with Alex, it felt like a knife twisting deeper into her heart. In their conversations, James and Khloe's anger grew as they planned their next steps. They couldn't just sit idly by and let Grace and Alex continue their lives as though nothing had happened. They needed to confront them, but in a way that would leave no room for excuses or denials. Their plan began to take shape. They discussed meeting with both Grace and Alex together, presenting irrefutable proof of the affair, so there could be no question of its reality. Khloe would take the lead in confronting her sister, while James would focus on Alex, delivering the kind of confrontation that would make him feel the weight of his actions. They both knew that the emotional fallout would be severe, but they were beyond caring about sparing Grace or Alex's feelings. What mattered now was facing the truth. Their plotting was not just born from pain, it was driven by a need for closure, for answers, for a resolution that would allow them to rebuild their shattered lives. Tension between them was palpable. As the days dragged on, their resolve hardened. It wasn't just about exposing the affair. It was about making sure that both Grace and Alex understood the depth of the damage they had caused. They couldn't let them get away with destroying their families, their trust, and their hearts. Khloe and James became more determined by the day. They had suffered enough. Now, it was time to make Grace and Alex face the consequences. The plan would unfold soon, and they were ready. The tension between the two of them, their shared pain, and the need for justice had become a driving force in their lives. James had planned the meeting carefully, hoping that confronting Grace and Alex in private would give them the chance to face their actions without outside interference. He chose a secluded cabin, far enough away from their town that they would have no distractions or interruptions. The isolation would allow them to express their anger and disappointment without any distractions, he thought. But the truth was, James wasn't sure what he expected. Deep down, he knew the situation was fragile and that things might not go as planned. Khloe stood by his side, a determined look in her eyes. She was ready, her pain and betrayal simmering beneath the surface, eager for justice. Both of them had agreed that there would be no mercy in this confrontation. This was about making Grace and Alex understand the weight of their actions. There would be no turning back. When Grace and Alex arrived, they were initially caught off guard by the setting. It was out of character for James, who usually avoided confrontations, and neither Grace nor Alex knew what to expect. They had no idea that this meeting would be the unraveling of everything they had taken for granted. As they entered the cabin, the air was thick with tension. Grace looked nervous, glancing at James and Khloe, sensing something was wrong. Alex, too, appeared uneasy, but his confidence remained. He didn't yet realize the storm that was about to break. The moment the door shut behind them, the accusations began. James, his voice tight with anger, didn't hold back. He accused Grace of betraying him, of taking their marriage for granted, and of throwing away everything they had built together. Khloe, equally furious, turned her attention to Alex. Her voice shook with emotion as she accused him of using his charm and false pretenses to manipulate her, of taking advantage of their relationship, and ultimately destroying her trust in everyone she had ever cared for. The words spilled out, raw and full of hurt. The anger, which had been building for weeks, was now unleashed in full force. James and Khloe's voices blended together in a storm of accusations, and at that moment, all reason seemed to vanish. Grace and Alex, initially defensive, found themselves struggling to explain their actions. Grace tried to apologize, but her words were drowned out by Khloe's sharp retorts. Alex, too, began to justify his actions, but he was quickly cut off by James's accusations. It was a battle of emotions, a mixture of betrayal, guilt, and anger. Grace and Alex tried to deny the affair, but the proof was undeniable. The simmering tension in the room exploded. Grace, overwhelmed by guilt, started to cry, but her tears only seemed to fuel the anger in Khloe and James. The conversation became chaotic, and the atmosphere quickly escalated from verbal accusations to something far more dangerous. In the heat of the moment, James lunged at Alex, his anger boiling over. Alex, in turn, reacted defensively. Two men struggled, pushing each other with such force that the furniture in the cabin was knocked over. Grace screamed, her voice desperate, trying to intervene and separate them. Khloe, too, moved forward, trying to stop the chaos, but it was too late. James and Alex's fight grew more intense, fists flying, both of them fueled by years of frustration and pain. The noise of the struggle, grunts, shouts, and the sound of furniture crashing echoed through the cabin. In the midst of the turmoil, neither James nor Alex was aware of the danger their fight had escalated to. Then, in a split second, the violence reached a tragic peak. As James swung at Alex, his fist collided with the edge of a nearby table, and the force sent Alex stumbling backward into a heavy object. The object, an old, sharp-edged lamp, fell and struck Alex on the side of his head with a sickening thud. The room fell silent as Alex collapsed to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. For a moment, no one moved. Khloe was the first to react, her hands trembling as she rushed to Alex's side. James, still panting from the struggle, stood frozen, his face drained of color as the reality of what had just happened hit him. He had never intended for things to get this far. He hadn't wanted anyone to be hurt. He just wanted them to understand the devastation they had caused. But now, the unthinkable had occurred. Grace was beside herself, crying out for Alex, her voice filled with panic. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The woman who had betrayed her marriage was now witnessing her husband and her lover locked in this violent altercation, and it was her sister's hand that had inadvertently led to the fatal injury. For a few long seconds, the room was filled with nothing but the sound of shallow breathing, the blood still pooling around Alex's body. It was only then that the crushing weight of the situation fully dawned on everyone. In the chaos, in the desperate need for retribution, they had taken things too far. Khloe and James exchanged a look, one of shock, guilt, and disbelief. They had set out to confront Grace and Alex, but neither of them had expected this. In their rage, they had crossed an irreversible line. The tragedy that followed would change their lives forever. After the confrontation, the police quickly arrive at the cabin. They find Alex's body, and everything that happened is investigated. The police ask each person what happened, and they discover that James and Alex had been in a fight that led to Alex's death. James is arrested and charged with manslaughter because the death was caused during the violent confrontation. Khloe feels a mix of sadness and anger. While she is devastated by Alex's death, she also knows that her actions led to the fight. Grace's affair with Alex is exposed, and she faces the consequences of her actions too. While Grace isn't charged with Alex's death, her affair is part of the reason the fight started in the first place. In the end, James faces legal trouble for accidentally killing Alex. Grace has to live with the fallout of her affair, which caused so much pain. Khloe is caught in the middle, losing both her sister's trust and the love of her life. After everything that happened, the emotional fallout is deep. Khloe can't forgive Grace. Their relationship is shattered, and Khloe is heartbroken from losing Alex. She feels betrayed by both Grace and Alex, and she struggles to cope with the pain. Grace, feeling guilty, knows she's lost everything. Her marriage to James is broken, and her sister, Khloe, won't speak to her. Grace thought the affair would be a short escape from her problems, but now she sees how much it ruined her life and everyone else's. If James survives his injuries, he's left full of bitterness and regret. He feels betrayed by Grace, and his marriage is no longer what it once was. He's angry, but also filled with sorrow. The trust he once had in his wife is gone, and their relationship is beyond repair. Khloe also feels the loss of Alex deeply. The pain of his death, combined with her anger at Grace and James, is overwhelming. She never imagined that confronting Grace would lead to this, and now she must live with the grief of losing Alex. In the weeks that follow, everyone is forced to face the consequences of what happened. Grace thinks about her affair and realizes that it wasn't worth it. It destroyed her life, her marriage, and her relationship with Khloe. What started as a secret escape ended up in tragedy, and she regrets her choices deeply. James also reflects on his actions. While he's angry with Grace for the affair, he also realizes that he wasn't a perfect husband. His emotional distance from Grace helped create the space for the affair to happen, and he regrets not seeing the signs earlier. Khloe, grieving Alex, decides to distance herself from her family. She can't forgive Grace, but she also knows she has to move forward. She needs time to heal from the pain of losing Alex and from the betrayal by her sister.